Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have an updated ranking of the Cosmere novels for you from Brandon Sanderson. Now, I have done a Cosmere ranking on here twice, but the first time I did it right when I started my channel, just as a video I wanted to do, and then the second time I did it, one, because I had a larger audience, wanted more people to find out about it, and then also because I had read more books. But since my most recent Cosmere ranking, which was, I believe, like 8 or 9 months ago, so it's been a decent while, I've since read 3 Cosmere stories, so I've really updated my ranking a little bit. And some other ones have moved a little bit in my estimation, but nothing's moved much. So I'm going to provide very basic thoughts on the books as I go through. Some of the books, I have 2 novellas on here, and then everything else is novel length. So, yeah. So I'm going to go, some of these will be like super quick general thoughts, and then some of them I might dive a little bit deeper, but this will be just a quick ranking to show my ranking of the Cosmere. And of course, if you have read the Cosmere, let me know your ranking down below. And I am sure you're going to have a different ranking than me, because nobody has the same top 2 as me. Like, I don't know anyone who has the same top 2 as me. So I'd be pleasantly surprised if I meet someone, but why don't we I have 16 books on here. So number 16, I don't have the physical book of this, so I'm just going to use the one that it's in this bind up for Arcanum Unbounded, and that is The Emperor's Soul. I read The Emperor's Soul as an individual, not part of this. I bought this recently because I'm going to read some of the other novellas and short stories in here. But I read The Emperor's Soul because I was told it won an award. I want to say a Hugo, I think it won, or was it a Nebula? It won an award. It won a big-time award. And then also it's one of like his well-regarded stories, and it's a little shorter story that's only like 100 pages. So I was like, yeah, I'm excited. I'll read this. And I did read it. And I enjoyed it, but the problem with The Emperor's Soul is that it just doesn't add enough for me, and it doesn't connect enough to the rest of Elantris. The magic system seemed far enough disconnected from the rest of the Elantrian magic system, and also it just didn't leave much of a mark on me. It does connect to one of the other books on this list, and if you've read that other book, you know how it connects. But it just didn't work in my estimation. So I'm sorry. Next, number 15 is Dawn Shard. This is another novella, although you could tell someone this book's 290 pages, and they'd be like, oh, so it's a novel. No, it's a novella, because it's, small. It's a smaller format, but it's, I don't know the exact word count, but it's like in that realm of being either a novella or novel, depending on who the author is. But it's a novella for Sanderson, and it's a fun story. It's kind of like a seafaring story. It's got a kind of adventure-y vibe, quest vibe to it that's a lot of fun. But none of the problem I have with it is none of the characters resonated with me. That's how that goes. So next, I told you some of these are going to be really rapid fire, and some of them I have more. Bands of Mourning is an enjoyable novel. The reason it's lower on the list is the plot didn't stick with me on this one, and while the things I loved were the storyline of Wax and Steris, I thought their stuff was great. I did not like how Wayne's storyline was handled, or how Wayne's storyline with certain other characters was handled. That was very frustrating to me. So, there's things about this book I don't like, but overall, it's still, like every book on here, I still enjoy. And from here on, I start really loving the books, but this one, unfortunately, is only number 14 on the list. Going to number 13 is Shadows of Self. The twist at the end of this book is amazing. I think the character work here is better than the character work in Bands of Mourning, and I think it is also just a fun story. I think that it's a very quick, fun story for Sanderson. The reason it's not higher is it doesn't have the impact that it needs. It has the character work, and it has a good plot, and even has good magic system stuff, but it doesn't have the impact that it needed to be higher. Next, I have the lowest rated Stormlight book for me in the number 12 spot, which is Oathbringer. Oathbringer, I think, is the weakest Stormlight book. It has probably the biggest Sanderlanche at the end. The Sanderlanche at the end of this was exhausting to read, but the book is delightful. There's two chapters in here that have Hoid that are just brilliant and lots of fun, and there's some great developments with Kaladin that I liked in this book, some great developments with Shallan, some great developments with Adolin, and particularly the backstory of Dalinar. And Jasnah, who I always pronounced Jasnah because it's a J. If it was going to be a Y, if you're going to pronounce it with a Y, spell it with a Y. Anyway, that's just me. So that was my number 12. Going into my number 11 is one of the recent books, and that's The Lost Metal. Really enjoyed this book a lot more than the other two that I mentioned, Wax and Wayne books on here. Gives great closure to the series, does a great job of wrapping up a lot of the plot lines and the characters. It has some really sweet, just really tender moments to it. I actually did like what they did with Wayne here, when I didn't like what they did with Wayne in previous books. And of course, Wax and Steris and all the rest of them, and Marasi, and they were all great. And there's some amazing, this is like all the Cosmere references come into this one. So I really enjoyed it. Speaking of all the Cosmere references, let's go into my number, what am I at next? My number 10. My number 10 is Rhythm of War. Rhythm of War, a step up from Oathbringer for me, really enjoyable. Even though we're stuck in the tower for most of this one, it's still an enjoyable book. By the way, beautiful cover. Beautiful cover. I love this cover so much. I think that this book is... It's a really, I think, a really like engrossing book. I thought the magic system was really good here, even though it can be tedious at points. And I thought some of the twists and reveals were great, even though they were kind of difficult to follow. But it was so much fun. The action sequence was so much fun. The Sanderlanche here, I think, is a lot more easy to follow than the Sanderlanche in Oathbringer, which is why I appreciated this. And this book just sets up the final book so well. And I liked seeing certain characters paired up. Some of the pairings in this book were really good, and made me want more. Next in my number 9 is Alloy of Law. This is one of those ones that I'm going to get in trouble for. I think this is the best of the Wax and Wayne books, even though everyone else thinks it's the worst. For me, it's the most simple one. It's the one that feels the most like a Sherlock Holmes-like novel. Like Wax really feels like the straight man character, and Wayne is the sidekick who is the wacky one. Whereas typically, Sherlock is the wacky main character, and Holmes is the straight man side character. So it's a reverse of Sherlock Holmes, but it felt so Sherlock Holmesy. And the atmosphere in this book I thought was great. I thought the twists in this book, the bombing sequence in this book was great, and I thought the reveals were great, and I really liked the setup of the Steris and Marasi stuff, and I think it's paid off well in book 4. I think that this book is paid off really well by the end of the series in Lost Metal. So that's why it was the most enjoyable, and it's probably the shortest Cosmere novel. If you count the other two novellas I referred to as novellas, then this is the shortest novel in the Cosmere. So, where am I? Number 8. Number 8 is the newest release that I'll talk about, and that is Tress of the Emerald Sea. I thought Tress of the Emerald Sea was a delightful, delightful story. We're now getting into my top tier Cosmere works. I thought that Tress was a great character. I thought that the minor characters here were great. I just did a review on this recently, which you can check out. Also, I thought that the humor in this book was the best humor in the Cosmere so far, and the narrator was great. And so, yeah, everything about this book was just really delightfully done. And the twists, oh my goodness, the twists. Now, I will say, this is like this again doesn't necessarily feel the impact that some of the later books have, but this is still really good. Next, I have my number 7 is Hero of Ages, and I'm actually going to pair it with my number 6, which is Well of Ascension. These two books run together in my mind, and I feel very similar about them. I love the politics in these books. I love Vin and Ellen's dynamics in these books. I really like the magic system, the world building in these books, and I really like the plot. And my favorite character in these books probably is Sazed, although Spook is actually quite good in Hero of Ages, and this really forms the backbone of the Cosmere. Like if you know Mistborn and understand it, you'll understand everything else because it all seems to stem from Mistborn. But I really enjoyed these two books, and there's just a sequence in here about 2/3 of the way through that just made me just smile with delight. And then there's a sequence here at the beginning and a sequence at the end that also made me have really emotional feelings. And the sequence at the end, I think everyone had because it's a really emotional sequence. That's my number 7 and my number 6. So next I'll talk about my number 5, which probably will get in trouble for how low I rated it here, but my top 5 are like some of my favorite novels of all time, not just the Cosmere. My number 5 is Way of Kings. Way of Kings, from start to finish, this book is a great character study for the characters, particularly Kaladin, although I really like Adolin in this book, who's really a minor character here. He becomes a major character later, but he's really just a minor character here. Shallan's storyline's pretty good, and Dalinar is just fantastic in this book. And the payoff at the end of this book is just so spectacular. And so this book has a lot of emotional weight for it for me. Now, my number 4 is Mistborn. And when I was reading Mistborn, I was having a delight. I was like, this is such a unique and fun book to read. And then I got to the ending. The final page of this book blew me away. The final page of this book's amazing. Well worth. Like, this is one of those books that I'm like, okay, maybe you're not loving the book at the moment, but this is one of those books you have to completely finish every page to the final page to get that payoff. And if by the final page you say this is not for me, I'll be like, all right, that's fine. But you have to get to the final page because the final page is great. But don't just read the final page by itself because you won't have the payoff proper. But this book is great. Vin in this book is great. The themes about this book are great, about politics, about government, about overreach, about trusting government, about not trusting government. All that stuff is great. Now my top 3. My number 3 is Words of Radiance. Best Stormlight book for me. Best Stormlight book. Man, Kaladin finally... I did not like Kaladin until the end of this book. And even though I recognize the amazing journey he goes through in Way of Kings, I did not enjoy him until I got to the end of Words of Radiance. Words of Radiance really did a great job with him. The backstory for Shallan was great and shocking in this book. Her dynamic and relationship with Adolin in this book is great, and it's the Sanderlanche at the end is spectacular. Is this the best Sanderlanche? I don't know. I don't know if it's the best Sanderlanche, but it's good. It is a great ending, and I really liked it, and I really liked where the characters ended up. So that's my number 3. My number 2 and my number 1, if you've been following me for any amount of time, you probably have figured it out, and you probably know, and probably you're rolling your eyes at the fact that I love it this much. Now, my number 2 is Warbreaker. I loved Warbreaker. Every time I've thought about it, every time I've reread it twice now, every time I hear people talk about it, I love it even more. Everything, the romance of Ciri and Susebron, the story, the rise and fall and re-rise of Vivenna, the humorous side characters in this book, the political backstabbing, the hilarious Lightsong and Blushweaver dynamics, the priests versus Ciri, and the townspeople versus Vivenna. All that stuff is great. But the themes in this book about religion, about those who are entrenched in religion, about politics, about government, about the way society should work, and what you do when you're put in an impossible situation. And also the themes about how to make the best out of a romance. All of that's great here. And so that's why it's my number 2. Now for my number 1. The one that so many people disagree with me. So many people put this as the worst Cosmere novel. And it just makes me sad because I love it so much. And this is my number 1 favorite novel of all time. And that's Elantris. I've reread it twice. Loved it both times. It's a delightful, sweet story. Raoden and Serene, some of my favorite characters ever. Hraithrin, one of my favorite villains ever. Oh, all that stuff worked so well in this book. And this is my favorite world building and kind of magic system. And this is the deepest of the deep themes and ideas that Brandon Sanderson explores. It's so dense with ideas. There's like no action in this book until the end. There's almost no action. It's almost all ideas. But the ideas here I thought were brilliant. Brought me to tears so many times when I've read it. The love story of the characters, the everything about this book worked for me. It is my favorite novel of all time. And I realize other people say, well, it has these problems, or people will say, oh, well, actually, this is why this book's better. And I'm like, maybe an argument can be made that there's a better novel out there, or that there are better Cosmere novels. But this book means the most to me. And it's the book that I've enjoyed reading the most. And it's the one that connects with me so much. So I love this book. So that's why it's my number one. So that's my ranking of the Cosmere. Really quick video. Hopefully you've read the Cosmere. If you haven't, where are you going to start? I'd love to hear that. There's a lot of starting points in the Cosmere that are great. First book in a series is great, or one of the standalones is great. But I recommend publication order personally. But I love all of these books, and I really look forward to having conversations. So if you've read them, what do you think? Am I crazy for my ranking? Should I have moved things around? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan. Thank you for watching, and let's see if this thing falls and breaks. This is always the worst part of the video, making the thumbnail, and I have to like hold the books like this.